Okay, today we're looking at the spirit-soul connection, understanding the I that I am. And this topic was triggered by our friend in Belize, down by Ecuador. She's not necessarily new to Unity, but said she was reading the book Lessons in Truth and came across Emily Cady's, or Unity's, spirit-soul-body model, and wanted to know the difference between spirit and soul. And that question has actually been raised many times. How do you explain the difference between spirit and soul? And it's not easy to do that. It's an intuitive thing that you pick up on. I think she will do that, or has maybe already. But the metaphor, one of the metaphors I am going to use is Cady's, and that's the bucket of ocean water. It's not the ocean, but it's the same water. And that's a pretty good model, pretty good way to think of it, that the soul is the same substance, the same energy, the same whatever you want to call it, as that larger ocean of God that we live and move and have our being in. So I'm going to use three different pictures today to try to clarify this idea. It's really not that difficult once it dawns on us. And she said, Emily Cady says that if you struggle with it, just let it go and, go down the road a while, and pretty soon it'll dawn on you, and it does, I think. There's still a lot of things that are difficult to grasp because of just who we are, what we do, how we live. It looks like we are very much separate from anything we would call God, because if you're like me, you grew up with the God up in the sky kind of thing, and I'm here and with all these problems, and God's up there with all the answers, and if I can make the connection, fine. But there's a lot of stuff, a lot of baggage we carry concerning all of this stuff. And so part of our spiritual journey is overcoming, it's a letting go of what we have been told is true, and rethinking, this relationship, the whole thing we call reality. So spirit and soul are words we use to describe spiritual abstractions. And that's true. Both are very real, but we do not experience them through the five senses. We know them intuitively. Jesus defined God as spirit, comparing it to the wind whose effects we see, while the wind itself is invisible. He said we must worship God in spirit, which I understand as the meditative practice of stilling the intellect and opening intuitively to our spiritual source. I've always responded to that statement, God is spirit, because you think about, what does that mean? And the word spirit that translates into English as spirit comes from the Greek pneuma, P-N-U-M-A. And I've explained this many times. It's where we get our pneumatic nail gun, which is an air gun. It's all tied into that. But pneuma is it's a force that is real, but you can't see it. And so Jesus compared it to the wind. And the word, of course, is comparable also, spirit and breath. Breath of the Almighty. Job talked about the breath of the Almighty. And it's an unseen reality. Very difficult to explain that, to put it in words. So we do as Jesus did, and we use parables and metaphors and language to talk about it in a way that maybe the mind can grasp. But all of the metaphors we use, all of the parables we use, this is beyond that. The reality of it is beyond that. And when you have an experience where your mind actually dips down into that ocean of God, you will come back with unable to describe what you experienced, but know that it's very real. And I talk about that quite a bit. The experience I had is the one that really defined my whole life, and I call it a mystical experience. I didn't know what to call it at the time because I didn't know what it was. I just knew it was something very real and something very mind-expanding. But so once you put your foot in that ocean, you know it's a very real thing, and it leaves you totally changed. And that doesn't mean that you think positive all the time or any of that stuff. It's just that you can never think of God in quite the same way. You see God as this invisible force, and it's that force is making me alive right now. It's the very source of my being. And so when we get down to that level of language, we're talking about a connection between spirit and soul. We're talking about the connection between this infinite power and how it is expressing in and as us. And I wrote extensively about this in my book, The Complete Soul. Spirit is universal life, love, power, and intelligence. Soul is an individualization of this universal energy, but capable of interfacing with the material world. Our consciousness is the idea-forming mechanism that enables us to interact with the world. And the consciousness thing is probably the most confusing part of the whole thing. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I used, not this particular photo, but one very close to it. It didn't have the two drops of water, it had just one. But I couldn't find that one again. But this is a drop of water. It's a drop somebody photographed very expertisely, caught this drop coming up after a drop was put in. And but I think this is a great picture to hold, this drop of water coming up out of this whole body of water, this larger body of water. You can see there's no place where the larger pool ends and the drop begins. They're connected. It's one and the same. But the thing that is different, that makes it seem different, is this consciousness thing. Our consciousness is the idea-forming mechanism that enables us to interact with the world. But what we also do with our consciousness is we create the belief in separation from God. We create pictures of God up in the sky. We create pictures of God as a powerful creator of the universe that gets pretty moody and has a lot of regret sometimes for creating us. We can come up with all kinds of things. And these things are part of the consciousness, have nothing to do with the drop of water and the ocean. So what my book, The Complete Soul, I went in and got Charles Fillmore's definition of the soul, and the way he defines soul is the way I would define consciousness, that it's the ideas that we hold. And Fillmore says the soul is in a state of evolution. Well, the drop of water, as you see, is about as good as it gets. What's it going to evolve to? It's already perfect. It's already exactly what it's supposed to be. There's no difference between that drop of water and the pool that it's coming out of, so it doesn't need to evolve. The evolution he's talking about is consciousness. It's our belief system. It's our understanding of our relationship to God. So that's what changes. That's why I called the book The Complete Soul, referring to the drop of water. But our consciousness definitely changes. My consciousness has changed dramatically over the years. From when I discovered Emily Cady, I was coming out of the traditional background, as many of you have, and that was a transition. And I really appreciated her voice, in her literary voice. She spoke with such authority that, I could not say that what she was I could not prove what she was saying was true, but something in me resonated totally with what she was saying, which I have gone back to that time often, realizing that something in me already knew what she was saying was true. Like, I had not forgotten exactly or totally that drop of water that I am, that soul that I am, that pure essence that I am. In the spiritual journey, it's about making the consciousness or bringing our belief system, our understanding, the ideas we carry around about who we are and what God is, what our relationship to God is, all of this, that's evolving. We are bringing that into alignment with what is true of us already. And that is, we're remembering, in other words. We're not learning, we're forgetting what is not true and remembering what is. That's what this whole journey is about. It's remembering. The mystic calls it recollection, and for obvious reasons. The mystic goes into meditation to recall what they are. And that, we're all mystics in that regard. If we are of the understanding that what we are looking for is ourselves. Whoever said that which we are looking for is that which is doing the looking. I've tried to find the source of that, and it's attributed to many different people, so nobody quite knows where it came from. But it's true. It's a statement, very simple, but very true. What I'm looking for is that which is doing the looking, me. What is me? Who am I? The I that I am. And that's a very powerful thing to meditate on. Our spiritual essence, our soul, is not bound or defined by time and space, but our consciousness is. When a person momentarily steps from their body, as in a near-death experience, they instantly rise out of the body-based consciousness and experience the vastness of their soul and their oneness with universal spirit. This is why they can't explain their experience, why they can't tell somebody that hasn't had one what it's like. They can try to tell what it's like, but many people will. One woman said that her family got sick of hearing her talk about it. She couldn't talk about anything else. It was so revolutionary to her. And she knew that people just could not see what she had seen, but she couldn't stop talking about it. And they thought, all you talk about is death. That's so morbid. But she was talking about life. She's talking about what she saw and experienced at a deeper level. And that's, I guess, one of the things people want to have experiences like this. But what I found, even with my experience, which I consider like sticking my toe in the water, there aren't many people that have had something like that and that can understand what you're talking about. I used to work for a minister. In my first job, I was an associate minister. And I tried to explain that spiritual experience to him, and he said, "Are you sure that wasn't a drug-induced thing?" I mean, a minister's asking me that, like he didn't think that you could have a mind-altering experience in church, I guess. I don't know. But he was formerly a whiskey salesman, so I guess he kind of related that way of experiencing things. But I said it wasn't any. It was not a drug experience or like a alcohol high or anything like that. It was something completely different, but very real. But anyway, the consciousness is bound by time and space. And again, when people come back from that level of experience, that's one of their biggest complaints. They're not only being shoved into a body that doesn't feel like it fits anymore, they're being shoved into the need to perceive this three-dimensional world from a very limited perspective. Like communication. How do you communicate something that's that important to you that nobody's ever seen before? That's one thing I think I've shared with you, they have said about the astronauts that walked on the moon. Many of them became alcoholics because there was nobody they could really talk to, that shared that kind of experience. And so I don't know if it's fair to say all of them did that, but I read several stories about people that went that route because it felt so like, how can you top that experience walking down the moon? Well, you can have a near-death experience. It's probably even better. But so it's understandable. Somebody has such a wonderful experience and they're trying to communicate with somebody. There's nobody you can talk to about it. And fortunately, that's getting better. We have these forums where people that have near-death experiences go to meet annually. I've been invited to some of those meetings. I have not yet gone because there was not one close. I think there's probably a group here in Grand Junction. I'm not sure. But almost every city now has a group of people you can go. It's a support group, and you've had this experience. They'll know exactly what you're talking about. And that's got to be very valuable, for a person that's been through something like that. So because one of the things they come up with is, nobody understands me, I must be losing my mind, I must be crazy. And there was a time not too long ago when our professional medical system thought they were losing their mind. They need to be locked up for a time and we'll give them a few shots of something that'll bring them back down to earth and make them healthy again. But fortunately, we're past that in a large degree. I still hear stories about people that are encountering people that don't, professionals that don't want to hear about it. A metaphor I find helpful is one of the sponge in the ocean. You think of the ocean water within the sponge as the soul of the sponge. So you got to kind of make a jump here in your mind. Like, you have this ocean water and you have this sponge and it's permeated with water. Well, just pretend like that water that's in the sponge is kind of hanging out there. That's the sponge, that's the unseen aspect of the sponge. Because if you get rid of that water, the sponge will die. It has to have that connection. So it's a support system, but just use your imagination to think of the water that's in that sponge. It probably does go in and out, just like our soul probably does. It's probably not real rigid. They say when you have some dreams, sometimes you dream and your soul takes off someplace. I think that's true, because some of those dreams that I've had have been pretty, you don't forget them too soon. But I don't like to dwell on that, because I don't want to necessarily depend on my dreams for answers, although there's ways to approach that are probably very healthy. I just haven't stayed with that. So imagine squeezing out the water and tossing the sponge onto the beach. The water you squeezed out remains in the ocean and keeps its individual identity. But now it lacks a body. It is a point of consciousness, fully aware of itself and its oneness with the sustaining source, the ocean. If it wishes to be seen and felt in the visible world, it must take on another sponge body. So you can see the sponge, you can see the transparent sponge there. That's the soul. Just imagine that. Because when people step out of the body, here's what's interesting. The I that we are is not the body. We have a body. If we were to step out of the body, we would continue to use this personal pronoun. Describing our experience to another, we would say, I went through a tunnel. I communicated with deceased relatives. I found myself in the middle of a beautiful meadow. This I is the soul, the all-sustaining life force in which we live as spirit, source, God, or whatever name we wish to give it. So that's another interesting thing. People will say, when I stepped out of my body, I was still me. I'm still I. I went through this experience. I saw this. I heard that. I communicated with these beings of light telepathically. They all say that, telepathically. Don't have to talk. So the reality of us is unseen and is permanently connected to the unseen that is our source. There's no difference between spirit and soul substance-wise. The difference is that we are individualized expressions of that ocean, but we are still part of it. And again, that's what people realize when they step out. All the barriers they have built up, that we have built up, barriers of separation. I'm here, God's somewhere else. And do you know why that began? Does anybody know why we started putting God in an unreachable place? It's good for the business of religion. If you can't come close to God, we'll do it for you. So it's a kind of a technique. It's a business technique of religion. And it's probably not intentional, but it's been exploited to the max. You remember the Jew of Jesus' day thought the connection with God was through the priesthood and through the Holy of Holies in the temple. That once a year the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies, make sacrifices on behalf of the people. That's the connection. So you're born into that culture, into that society. You grow up believing that. Well, all of us basically have. We don't think of it that way. We don't have a Holy of Holies, but we kind of do. We call it the church. You know, it's a place where if we go, we're closer to God, so to speak. And of course, I've had a lot of people say, I'm closer to God out in the woods and all that. Well, that's, they're advancing. You know, they're understanding that wherever I am, God is. But there is this thing that if you believe, if the church gets you to believe you need them, or you need it to connect with God, you know, that's it's an unfair use of spiritual ignorance. Because a guy like Jesus comes along and says, go into your inner room, you know, shut the door, pray to your Father in secret, and the Father who sees in secret will answer you openly. And I don't suppose the rabbis cared for that message because it's bad for business. If I don't go to the temple and, you know, buy my sacrificial animal, you know, to do, I mean, the sacrificial sales was big business. And when you had an event like Passover in Jerusalem, you know, where all the people would come in as pilgrims, there'd be thousands of people. The temple buying sacrificial lambs and whatever. Jesus, according to John, not according to the other three Gospels, but he was sacrificed. He was nailed to the cross on the day the sacrifices were, the lambs were being slaughtered. And so that's the connection that John was trying to make. But that's not what Matthew and Luke and Mark said. Jesus experienced the Passover with the disciples. That's the Last Supper. So you have a problem with dating, you know, with chronology there. But when you get into that stuff, you start seeing all over the place. There's all kinds of conflicts like that. But John was intending to say, here's the sacrificial lamb. You know, this is Jesus. And this is the last one that's going to be needed. That's the message. And that's the message we hear today. Because we don't have an altar for... If I saw somebody sacrifice a lamb, I'd throw you out of church, because I don't even eat lamb, because I can't even imagine killing one. They're so cute. And I like to watch lamb videos, you know, about how cute goats and lambs are. But anyway, it's a culture, and now we think of sacrifice. How do we do sacrifice today? We give up our Sunday morning to go to church. You know, we tithe. We spend time in prayer. We spend time in study. There's ways that sacrifice is thought of that has nothing to do with giving animals or any of that stuff, but it's usually connected in some way with the religious organization. And there's a place for that. It's not bad. It's not a bad thing. It's only bad if we just stop thinking. If we let somebody else, you know, the Apostles' Creed, for example, I think it reached its maximum translate or form in the 4th century. But there are people that go to church every Sunday morning and recite that. So somebody has worked out, here's what I'm going to believe. Here's what you're to believe. They tell you what to think, not how to think. And I think this is the important distinction that we want to make. Unity to me has always been how to think. It's not what to think. It's how to put your mind in a place, and unity has always advocated becoming still the intellectual mind as much as you possibly can, and open yourself intuitively to that presence. That's how you use your mind. It's not here's what you're going to experience or what you're going to believe. Because you are free to believe whatever you want. What's interesting about truth, that is, we are getting down to understanding what is this underlying reality. And what's interesting is scholars have recognized for a long time there is what they call a perennial philosophy. And it was written about, I can't think of the guy's name, friend of Darwin, grandfather was a friend of the guy that wrote, Aldous Huxley wrote about the perennial philosophy. And what that is, it's a series of ideas that keep coming up. They come up through every culture, and ideas like God is everywhere present. That's one of them. The individual is connected with that one presence. That's another one. That connection with God is within all people. That's another one. It keeps coming up. And if you do a quick study of the perennial philosophy, there's a lot of stuff online about it. You'll see that all through the teachings of Jesus. You'll see these ideas all through the teachings of Jesus. But they've also been modified. They've been mixed up a little bit to fit the narrative, the belief that God is separate from us. God is accessible only through the means we declare. There's a lot of people that say the Bible is the Word of God. That's your connection with God. And I used to believe that. That's what I was trained to believe. I don't know if I ever believed it, but I was trained to believe it was true. Because I would read the Bible and I would think, if this is my connection with God, we've got a problem. Because this thing is confusing. And it is. But the more I get into it, the more I understand why it is. You take the flood story, for example. That's two stories that are mixed together that were written somewhere between 500 to 1,000 years apart. And they're presented as a single story. Our Christmas story, another one, the nativity scene, shepherds, wise men, all together. That's a combination of two completely unrelated stories. But we make them one. We make them into one thing. So we've been trained to think that way. The Bible being the Word of God, well, it's not, to put it bluntly. The Word of God is that inspiration rising up in you. That's the Word, and that Word is being made flesh, not in Jesus, but in you. It's you individualizing as God. That's how the Word is made flesh. And what is made flesh means? It means it is creating a link between the unseen universal life force and that which interfaces with the three-dimensional world. That's you. That's me. It's the soul. So it's not an easy thing to grasp, and we have to put aside a lot of our preconceptions when we think about it. But it makes absolute sense, and it has driven me to exchange the teachings of the church for what I believe are the teachings of Jesus, to see the difference in these two. And I believe he taught the perennial philosophy without knowing it. He wouldn't have called it that, of course. But he was tapping into universal ideas that all mystics of all ages, all cultures, all parts of the world. They say the same thing. I have long acknowledged, that certain sayings of Jesus appeal to me more than others, and I'm sure the same is true with you. But what I have found is the ones with the mystical slant are the ones that I relate to most. And then now I'm recognizing that there were probably many of those sayings that started out with a mystical slant that were modified. You ever heard of the Septuagint? The Bible, the Hebrew Bible was written in Hebrew. And some people thought, because there's so many people speaking Greek, it would be a good idea to translate it. So that's what it is. It's so-called 70 scholars translated this years ago. So that's considered kind of a guiding form of Scripture. Well, the Christian church started, and a lot of the early church fathers would go back to that book and change it to match the Christian message. And so when you see the gospel writers quoting scriptures, quoting prophecy, what they call prophecy, there is no Jewish scholar who says that's legitimate. And if you want to know if it's legitimate or not, ask a Jewish scholar, because it's their Bible. It's their book, Hebrew Scripture. But they know for a fact, because they have this copies of this document long before they started tampering with it, long before the Christians got hold of it. Origen is one of the church fathers that you may have heard of or may not, but he was one that did it big time. And all that's very interesting to me. So why do we have to bend the truth to get the truth? And the truth is, you don't. So we set aside much of the tradition and look for what is real, what is true. And this perennial philosophy, God is everywhere present, centered in me, I'm an expression of that. That's the best fit that I found so far. It's the best match for what I think is true, or what I know is true, I guess. That's why I'm here. Is that enough? Thank you for watching this week's program. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. We want to reach as many people as we can, and we appreciate your help. We have many subjects in our video lineup, so feel free to take a look. If there's a topic you don't see and would like me to address, just put it in the comment section. I'd love to know what's on your mind. Thanks again for your interest in independent unity, and have a wonderful week.